Hey everyone, it's me Charlie here, welcome back. Streaming sucks, like really bad, with an X and like 3 exclamation marks. A little trivia question for you. What do you think was Netflix's most watched series by views in 2024? Was it Squid Game, Baby Reindeer, or maybe even Bridgerton? Nope, it was Fool Me Once, with 107 million views. Personally, I'd never even heard of it before looking this up, and I bet you might not have either, which is kind of crazy, right? The most viewed series on the biggest streaming service in the world, and it just didn't crack into the cultural zeitgeist. Within weeks, it had practically evaporated from our collective memories, if we'd even seen any of it at all. Today, I want to talk about the impact of streaming services on the culture, its particular brand of binging on the industry, anti-consumer practices, and yes, a bit on piracy. All in order to highlight how physical media is clearly goated and far superior, and everyone knows this, at least deep down. Many of us would remember there was actually a time when streaming felt kind of amazing. In the early days, it was cheap, everything was in one place, the main players were just clearly burning money and making zero profit and not caring. It was beautiful, but fleeting. It genuinely felt like the future had arrived on our screens. That era is long behind us, my friends. Today, you need like 10 different subscriptions if you want to truly access everything and not be constantly keeping track of cancelling and resubscribing. If you can even manage to jump through the deliberately confusing hoops and increasingly unfriendly hurdles required to cancel some of these services, it's as bad as a gym membership at times. Of course, the prices continue to go up every year, and if you even dare to think about sharing your account password with a friend these days, you can expect the big guys to turn up and firebomb your house within 1 to 2 business days. At a time when our biggest digital services are actively funneling money into the forever wars and upholding genocidal apartheid regimes globally, while simultaneously building some of the most anti-artist systems imaginable, not just audiences but artists themselves are increasingly jumping ship to smaller, independent platforms and services. I promise this whole video isn't a downer, guys. There's a silver lining to this grey cloud of doomerism, I swear. Before we go any further though, I want to talk about what historically led us to where we are today. So basically about 13.8 billion years ago, give or take, the Big Bang is thought to have birthed the universe. Skip forward a few years to 2013 when Netflix released series 1 of their first original streaming show, titled House of Cards. What was truly pioneering though was that they released every episode at the same time, which had not really been done before. And for the first few Netflix originals, this was somewhat of a novelty, and many of these, crucially, otherwise well-made and ambitious shows were additionally helped by this adoption of a binge model. Since then, of course, Netflix has long abandoned this focus, shifting to more of a quantity over quality approach, and the sheer volume of content they release every year has simply made it near impossible for the majority of their releases to break through culturally. Netflix obviously didn't invent the binge model. Far from it. DVD box sets were already an established thing for one, as was torrenting whole seasons of shows. But what they did do was make this essentially the industry default. And I know there's some old heads out there who'd probably say, you kids don't know how good you've got it. Streaming is still convenient and not unaffordable at all. At least not for me and my family here in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, especially compared to how cable used to be. Yeah, man, well, I can definitely tell you it's going down that road. The future of streaming isn't looking particularly bright on the consumer side. We're not living in those first few years of Netflix pumping money into their service and snapping up every IP and every morning waking up to sunshine and rainbows, mate, okay? Wake up, buddy. While of course there's a place for this sort of model, I would argue in rewatching what's already been aired, when everyone watches everything at their own pace, it's much harder to get everyone on the same page and create a conversation and sense of community around a piece of media. No one wants to spoil someone else's enjoyment of their favorite show by giving away some big reveal before their friend gets to it. With HBO shows, for example, like House of the Dragon, Last of Us, and Succession, you get way more of that week-to-week buzz, which additionally dramatically extends the life of the show, sometimes even for years between seasons. Would Game of Thrones, for example, have been the cultural juggernaut and as widely popular as it was were it dropped all at once? Without that element of fan obsession over every little detail and hint weekly? I don't think so. Additionally, with the extreme cutthroat emphasis Netflix, for example, seems to place on the performance of a new show in its first 4 weeks, so frequently now, this is resulting in good stuff lasting for just 1 season. I think a lot of people have had the experience now of their favorite show being cancelled after not proving itself deserving of more investment or whatever. It just must be so crap for anyone who's actually trying to make anything challenging or innovative or remotely risky on these platforms. If your thing doesn't blow up instantly, there's no time given for it to find an audience, it's just gonna get canned. Brutal. Of course, there are some shows that are so good that they manage to push through and defy this rule, sort of undeniable in a way, but I would say very few shows that are binged are actually a real communal experience and aren't a fleeting one that people watch at random times. Most things are better when we do them together, in my opinion, even when that stuff is the 8th show that's come out this week that's essentially a lower budget 10-part movie. Damien Lindelof, co-creator of Lost, described this phenomenon as TV becoming very artisanal. Of course, there's something to be said here in relation to the wider cultural impact of algorithmic discovery on our social media feeds, allowing us all to live in our own little pocket universes of truth, of entertainment, the significant disillusion of the mainstream as a concept, and the extreme corporatism of these industries alike, but really that's another video in itself. Won't someone please think of the zeitgeist? We need stuff that lasts longer than a week, God. The trickle-down effects of streaming are everywhere. There are a lot of negative impacts on local content, for example. Here in Australia, Spotify has done a lot of damage to our domestic music industry, which I think a lot of people haven't quite put together at this stage. People just don't listen to or watch nearly as much Australian media as they used to. And I actually think that's having a lot of wider cultural effects on everything low-key, from political disengagement to the importing of weird cultural wars, mainly from the US, I think. Let's be real, lots of places are suffering from that one, to be fair. Why can't I overhear what the Chinese right-wing grifters are saying this week? Commercial television broadcasters in Australia are required by law to broadcast at least 55% Australian content from 6 AM and midnight. And in 2024, FTA TV broadcasters smashed these requirements, with an average 74% of Australian content on their primary channels. Which is great, but people aren't watching FTA TV nearly as much, man. I think everyone knows that. In November 2024, the federal government quietly shelved their plans to introduce local content requirements for major streaming platforms, with no indication the policy would ever be returned to, which I think is a genuine shame. Apparently, the roadblock at the time had something to do with concerns the laws would somehow conflict with our free trade agreement with the US. That worked out pretty well, hey. On the industry side, the Writers Guild of America 2023 strikes showed how the declining of residuals, the shrinking of writers' rooms, and fears surrounding studios replacing them with ChatGPT as they continue to pay their top executives 9 figures, is being impacted by the state and trajectory of our digital ecosystems. These supposedly risk-adverse suits whose only concern is the bottom line, funnily enough, don't seem nearly as concerned when it's their employees who are facing the brunt of the blow. Steven Soderbergh, American director of 1989's Sex, Lies, and Videotape, once said that it's absolutely conceivable that the streaming subscription model is the crypto of the entertainment business. And on the consumer side, streaming just isn't convenient anymore. And with that, we're finally ready to talk about piracy, the elephant in the room. Gabe Newell, or Gaben, somewhat legendary co-founder of Valve, the developers of Steam and a game once every 15 years, once famously said, "Piracy is almost always a service problem, and not a pricing problem," meaning that most people pirate because the product or service is difficult or even straight up impossible in some cases to access, and would otherwise be willing to pay to access it legitimately. While I think obviously the price tag is a pretty important factor as well, indie titles such as Adelaide-based developers Team Cherry's Hollow Knight Silksong, that was a mouthful, and its seismic debut in 2025 with 5 million players in its first 3 days, briefly breaking Steam itself on the day of its release, all while being priced at just $30, have shown the impact of the increasing democratization of tools and the strength of indie creators in this era, and that not pricing people out can obviously make a huge difference. I think Gabe is largely right though, and not that I would know anything about it personally, of course, but from what I've heard, piracy is pretty accessible right now. And don't get it twisted, most seeders and server hosts are certainly doing more for the culture than these multi-billion-dollar conglomerates. And beyond all that, there's all the little things that streaming and the pursuit of profit loses that you don't really think about until they're gone. Obviously they're way less important, but things like box art, cool physical tie-ins, little freebies like pull-out posters and instruction manuals, art books and behind-the-scenes stuff, cut content and DVD extras, all go by the wayside with a dominant, fully open-armed adoption of streaming. Okay, Doomer section over. We've reached the light at the end of the tunnel, if you will. Because people are pushing back on some of this stuff. CDs have been on the come up once again, and the triumphant vinyl revival we've seen over the past 10 years is especially interesting because Gen Z loves it too. Not so much to regularly play, but more so because they look cool or want to support the artists on a deeper level. But I think it shows that more and more people are actually wanting to own the media they love, as opposed to a temporary access pass to things that could, without any given warning, be reduced to atoms. I think the fact that people are pursuing this stuff despite them not always being the most convenient way to watch or listen or whatever, shows how much value that realness has for people. Also, I just think it's a very human thing at the end of the day, you know? To crave tangibility, getting our hands on things and collecting stuff. I'm not saying, to be clear, that we should all become super materialistic and hoarders, but when more and more aspects of our lives and the things we love are being commodified and disfigured brutally into these huge cloud-based techno-capital beast machine monsters, I can see how people would want to feel more grounded with their media and actually own the things they buy. I don't know, man, doesn't feel like that crazy to me. The appetite is there for an alternative, for permanence and tangibility. Special shout out to the people putting in the effort to upkeep services that allow people to access cool older technologies that companies have decided are no longer economically worthwhile. Anyone making anything open source, anyone who hosts terabytes of legitimate non-virus ridden torrents of games, movies, and also music, and probably using multiple city blocks of power to do so. Still nothing compared to ChatGPT, by the way, that's also a different video. As well as a bunch of other services I obviously won't name because I'm not an idiot or a narc. Also a shout out to some of the people showcasing these, as well as some lesser known physical media formats. At Formico, or F Formico on YouTube comes to mind. She had a great video a while back about the Logitech acquired Squeezebox music players that are still pretty cool. You should definitely go check out her channel if you're interested. Also, a shout out to public services like the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine. Go to your local library. Libraries are awesome and will often have ways to manage whatever super niche media format you've got your hands on, or at the very least, the resources to do so, for free. Streaming, for better or worse, isn't going anywhere. And there does exist a place for it in our modern media landscape. But as long as our biggest services continue to go down the same path as cable, becoming more anti-consumer, overpriced, and fragmented, people will continue to jump ship and look for alternative means. Physical media, on the other hand, to me at least, represents culture that can't just be deleted when a licensing deal expires. Anyway, that's my rant, essentially. Hope you enjoyed. Cancel your Disney Plus. Bye bye!